Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to talk about the fight that is flying under the radar for the UFC Saudi Arabia card and the co-headliner of that card, Sergei Pavlovich versus Alexander Volkov, and possibly why that fight is flying under the radar so much. Let's get right into the video. Okay, so we know the UFC Saudi Arabia card was originally headlined by Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev, and now is headlined by Robert Whittaker versus Ikram Eliskerov after Khamzat Chimaev pulled out of his fight. But what have we not been looking at? And that is the absolute duel and brawl between Alexander Volkov and Sergei Pavlovich scheduled for this time in Saudi Arabia. Sergei Pavlovich is an absolute monster. We look at his fight all the way up to fighting Tom Aspinall, where he was going insane in the UFC, knocking out Curtis Blades in the first round, knocking Tai Tuivasa out in under a minute, knocking Derek Lewis out, and so many other fighters in the organization, sending them out cold. His only loss in the UFC is to Alistair Overeem, and that was in his first fight within the organization. Alexander Volkov, on the other hand, has been around in the organization for a very long time, coming off a win against Tai Tuivasa last year at UFC 293 as the co-main event, in a very good fight where Alexander Volkov looked incredible in that fight. But Tai Tuivasa is an incredibly different opponent than Sergei Pavlovich, and apparently these two are friends. They've sparred with one another, and apparently Alexander Volkov has never won against Sergei Pavlovich, and we're going to see going into this fight on Saturday night or next Saturday night in Saudi Arabia. And all I got to say is Sergei Pavlovich possesses true one-punch knockout power in the UFC. I don't care who Sergei fights. Sergei is probably the strongest person in the UFC, period, up there rivaling Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is so unbelievably strong, and to think that there could be one person in the UFC who is stronger than him is absolutely remarkable. You look at that shot that he hit Tom Aspinall with in the first round, it was not a clean shot at all, and it rocked Tom Aspinall visibly, which is insane to see. Ultimately, the only way for Alexander Volkov to win this fight against Sergei Pavlovich is to use his height to his advantage. If you don't know, Alexander Volkov is 6'7". He is an absolute giant within the octagon. Sergei Pavlovich, I think, is 6'3" or 6'4", but Sergei is very bulky. He's got that move. He's very athletic, but he has some bulk to him. Volkov's going to have the range with him, and ultimately the best thing that he's going to be able to utilize are those kicks that Volkov possesses. Volkov has got long arms, we all know, but those kicks to be able to push off Sergei, to get him off of him, to use the teep kicks, and just to make sure that he can have his range and fight his fight rather than fighting a brawl like Sergei is going to want. Because if he does that, ultimately there's no way that Volkov is going to win this fight. As we've heard, as Volkov reported, that he has never beat Sergei in a sparring match, even though they've sparred previously, and I do not see that changing unless if Alexander Volkov can utilize that distance incredibly well. As I keep alluding to, Sergei Pavlovich hits like an absolute truck, and there's nothing that anyone can do about that unless if you're stepping out in front of him, and the only thing you can do to avoid it is to be able to use those kicks, use those jabs to be able to make sure that you are keeping him away from you. In reality, Sergei needs to be as far away of you as possible, which is super, super difficult to achieve considering how long Sergei is. Ultimately, going into this fight, and I will make a full prediction later this week in a video breaking down the UFC Saudi Arabia card, but I have Sergei Pavlovich winning this fight. I just don't see there's a singular way where Sergei Pavlovich cannot work around the reach of Alexander Volkov. Alexander Volkov is so good. Look at his fight with Tai Tuivasa, which I talked about a little bit earlier, but he genuinely looked amazing in that fight. Ended off getting the Ezekiel choke at the end, but I think that Volkov's legs and range isn't going to be enough to be able to fend off Sergei Pavlovich. And this fight is going to be a banger, and I know it will. If you told me Alexander Volkov won this fight, I would believe you, because this fight is so close and so neck to neck, and probably the most underrated fight currently booked in the UFC. And truly, I cannot wait to see Alexander Volkov fight Sergei Pavlovich next weekend. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate you guys enjoying the content. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And please let me know if you guys have been really thinking about this fight and so excited. There's been so much news going on in the UFC community with Conor McGregor pulling out, Jamal Hill pulling out, Khamzat Chimaev pulling out. And I want to make sure that this fight gets the adequate light that it deserves. You have two possible heavyweight contenders going at it. and one of the best heavyweight prospects in Sergei Pavlovich that the UFC has, and that could be for the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys very, very soon with more content coming.